So we didn't know it was a crowded market. This is something we learned later on. Ferruccio and I would meet at the Starbucks coffee at 6 a.m. twice a week so that we could crunch 2 hours of work before going to the office. So one of the things that YC does really well is they ask you to come up with a topic every week you want to solve, which is the most urgent one for your startup. So it forces you to prioritize what's the most urgent piece. Once you've treated a problem, you shouldn't bring it twice. Realizing that the people that will pay for your product are not the ones, or necessarily the ones that are the most active in your product. You know, the most active users are the one that loved us the most. But then when we put a paywall and we asked people for their money, we found out that not all problems were equals.
I'm pretty sure you're going to share stories. It's just 3 weeks, so soon you're going to be sharing on X or LinkedIn what has been happening and so on.
I just joined 3 weeks ago, so it's still super fresh, but from what I've seen so far, the company is great and moving super fast.
Hello, welcome to Untrapping Product Teams. Here we speak the unfiltered truth about creating digital products. And today, to talk about it, we have Enzo Avigo, former CEO of June, who recently moved to Amplitude, and we're going to talk more about it soon. So welcome to the show, Enzo.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. We have been talking on LinkedIn. I have been following your content and so on. And now it's really interesting to talk about product, challenge, and different things.
That's very exciting. The first time you meet someone in person or online and you break the ice and this person is going to belong to your inner circle for the rest of your life is just amazing. I love it.
That's good. That's really nice. So you are the former CEO of June. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what was June. The audience might be curious to learn more about it.
Yeah, sure. So June was, that sounds weird. It's not anymore, a product analytics for B2B SaaS. So what we were doing is we were providing features so that B2B SaaS could leverage their product analytics. So things around account level analytics, very deep customer profiles, and then stuff like CRM integrations with, typical CRMs. I think the thesis we had and what we found out is that B2B SaaS operates slightly differently from consumer products when it comes to leveraging product data. And so we were building that hub so that product teams and customer success teams and salespeople could use their product data to make revenue, basically.
I'm very curious, you decided to start a company and this is a bit of a crowded market. What drove you to jump into that?
So we didn't know it was a crowded market. This is something we learned later on. I wrote about it multiple times. I think one of the learning, then I will answer your question, but one of the learning about markets is that there are many, many SaaS markets where there is 2 or 3 big incumbents. A very epiphany moment for me was if you use a product like Built With, which is a platform to see technologies used by different websites. They have a way to see categories of products. And oftentimes you will see a polarization of 2 leaders in the market. So CRM, for instance, have Salesforce and HubSpot. In product analytics, there is maybe Amplitude, and maybe the second player would be Mixpanel. And I think one thing we learned is that it can be quite hard to actually penetrate and win in a market with multiple incumbents. I think because also of the noise that the market already has suffered from. It's just hard for people to even understand how different a third or fourth or fifth product can be. So that's for the market being crowded, but I think we managed to differentiate at some point. And about building a company, I wanted to build a company for a while, since I'm like a teenager. And then after a couple of years, experiencing some problems at my job, I figured out that I wanted to leave my job and eventually solve one of my problems. At the time, I was super methodical. I had started a list of problems I had at work. And every week I would review the problems and trying to assess if I had the problem again on that week. And then I would basically, reprioritize my problems. And that problem of understanding users' behaviors kept coming back for many, many years. And so at some point I thought, okay, that's a meaty problem. People are willing to spend money for. That's a problem I have. That is a problem that I still have. It doesn't look like the industry has, solved it for me or is about to solve it for me. and it's a recurring problem. I think it's very important when you solve a problem to make sure it's recurring, because otherwise, it's harder to monetize on a recurring basis, for instance.
That's an interesting way. So you were working and you wanted to found your company. You were finding a recurring problem, but then like jumping to to start your own company. How did you start exactly? When you look at finance, finding a co-founder, or how was it?
That's a long journey. So I think I think things can happen by default to you, or you can be intentional. I was part of the people that had to make it intentional. I was in my early 30s. I had a quiet, busy work. I was a product manager at Intercom at the time. I had lots of hobbies outside of work, and for me, it was about finding the problem I wanted to work on, something I was passionate about. um, I am a passionate person, so I do put a lot of care into the things that I love, and I know that I need to be attached to things to dedicate time. So I wanted to spend time in an industry that I cared about. And then you're right, finding the co-founder was super important. You can be a solo founder. I'm a very emotional, I would say, person. I mean, emotional, I guess in a good way. I like to connect with people. And so I wanted to have a co-founder also because I'm a generalist and I wanted someone to be able to write code so that we could, build the product fast, iterate on the feedback we had early on and not depend, on an agency or a freelancer for that. So I think I remember watching a video from YC at the time that said that the best way to find a co-founder is to go through your network, maybe LinkedIn, and list 5 people you think you would be interested to work with and message them in the next 24 hours. Just saying something like, hey, look, I have this idea. I think it would be interesting to, bounce some ideas together, see if, they would be a fit. And that's what I did at the time. I pinged, I think, 5 people, 5 CTOs, people I, truly believed in. And funny enough, one of that person that I didn't expect was a colleague at work, Ferruccio, who became later on my co-founder. We were working the same product team at Intercom, him as a product engineer, myself as a product manager. And we would just talk about entrepreneurship all the time. And eventually, we started to craft a couple of products together outside of work. And those were like not June. Those were different products in the same space. And I think as we went through that experience, we learned that we really enjoyed working together. I think we developed some respect for each other and each other's work and perspective on things. And slowly enough, we moved from side projects outside of work and full-time jobs at Intercom to, leaving our jobs and starting our own company.
It's a quite practical advice. Many people think, like, how do I find the founder and so on? And now I just say, just look at LinkedIn, imagine people, and message them the next 24 hours. It's quite interesting. Like, and you end up find someone, and then you started a company. And what I'm curious about, like, how long was the journey?
Yeah. So what journey? The journey from the idea to starting the company or the whole journey after that?
No, the whole journey after that. That's the length I want to understand, because recently you moved to Amplitude. We're gonna get there, but this journey of June, how long did it last?
I think total 4 years and a half. But from the kind of when we were at Intercom, what we would do is outside of work, we would drive some user interviews to understand the problem space. And that maybe started 6 to 8 months before. So total me spending time on kind of like June broadly was probably more than 5 years. And funny enough, I'm still in the pragmatic space now because I really love that space and I think there's a lot I can contribute to. So it's been more than 5 years now, and it's going to be a lot more than that, hopefully in the future, spent on that space. But June itself was 5 years, 5 years and a half. So maybe 6, 8 months before we left our job doing some exploration, Ferruccio and I would meet at the Starbucks coffee at 6 a.m. Twice a week so that we could crunch 2 hours of work before going to the office. Because at night we would have, our partners and other things that would pop in. And and after that, we decided one day we wanted to leave our jobs to make it happen. And I think what happened next was interesting. I think we were lucky to have some momentum. So to have some people sponsoring us, believing in us. We found very quickly an office in Paris. There was a startup incubator or a startup studio in Paris that early on believed in us and gave us an office, gave us a salary actually, very tiny but just enough to eat sandwiches every day. And then one step after another, we started to build up the MVP, the alpha, the beta. We launched it, got a few hundred users. I can go in depth on all of that. Then we joined YC. But I think those first 4 months after we left our job until we actually joined YC, where things started to accelerate with us, I think we got super lucky because we got some really good momentum. And I think this is one of the things that kills startup early on. Like, you know, not being able to be good setup every day where you can move forward your business
Mm-hmm.
is the main reason why early stage startup just never figure things out. So we got this location we could go to every day, a bit of money, so we didn't have to do freelance or other stuff that would take away our focus. There would be lots of other startups which were our early customers, so we could talk to them and actually do all the user discovery with them. And we got a bit of funding. I think we got $50,000 at the time from this startup studio for a very cheap price of the company. So I think they made a good deal at the time. But that was super useful because suddenly you realize that there are people out there with money that are willing to put that money on you because you're going to work extremely hard and hopefully you're going to transform that money into something else.
It's quite a nice journey. And one thing I'm particularly interested, you mentioned momentum. So you were coming from Intercom with your co-founder, and Intercom is big. And then you go to start your own startup, like 6 a.m., Starbucks, and so on. Completely different journey. Like maybe you could elaborate a little bit on how you created the momentum and leverage that.
So basic things like having as I said, location, a bit of money to live, have a bit of a balanced life, these kind of things. I think that was quite important for us. As I said, I think at the time I had no clue what building a startup was. I had no clue, what's the legal entity you need to build. I have no clue what sort of profiles you need to hire. I had no clue. I had no clue about pretty much everything, right? The go to market. I was a product guy, so how do you even go to market? Like, how do you choose between being like marketing led or sales led? How the business financials gonna work. So I think it was just a lot of discovery along the way, a lot of questions, a lot of interest or curiosity that pushed
Mm-hmm.
us to figure these things out. One of the big turning point was joining YC. I think at this time we joined an ecosystem where there were basically a playbook or an answer to pretty much any questions. So we would show up on a weekly cadence with a partner there, and we would ask questions, and then we would have people in front of us that had been asked these questions hundreds of times.
Okay.
And so I think in terms of momentum, this was a turning point for us because we realized that the majority of questions can be answered in a fairly concise way, and the majority of problems you have at the startup can actually be solved on a weekly cadence.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that YC does really well is they ask you to come up with a topic every week you want to solve, which is the most urgent one for your startup. So it forces you to prioritize what's the most urgent piece. And if it doesn't make sense, then they will tell you and you will also figure it out. And the next piece is also that once you've treated a problem, you shouldn't bring it twice. Ideally, you close a problem every week. And so, there is 3 months at YC, for instance, so that's 12 problems, let's say. You pretty much answered, the biggest questions you have, at least early on. So that was one very important piece of momentum for us. I think that's why, startup ecosystem, incubators, accelerators, whatever, are just extremely healthy for startups. Some people just go there as they would go to high school or college and just hang around. That's true, But other than that, if you have surrounded by, good intended people, uh, that gives you the amount of feedback you need and the energy to keep coming back every day, and and so on. So that was a big one. And then after YC, we raised a seed round, kind of a pre-seed. I think we pitched that as a seed round, but in fairness, it was super tiny. And we left a lot of money on the table too. I think we wanted to be super nimble. That's another topic. And after that, you get some decent momentum, because now that and I think this is the beauty of the VC world. There is lots of pros and cons of raising money, but one of the pro is that suddenly you have to move very fast. You're working, time is against you. You need to figure things out very fast. If you start to monetize, you need to make sure you reach some multiples every year, especially in B2B SaaS. If you haven't monetized, then you have, informal board members and discussions maybe, and you need to make some progress, and that has helped us a lot at this time. So we went from 100 beta users before we joined YC to launching a product publicly by the end of YC, moving to I think 500 weekly active companies, and then by the end of the year I think we tripled that to 1 or 2K active companies. And then at this time we're like, okay, let's monetize. Company has been around for a year and a half. We need to figure out if we're doing the right things. And this is another turning point, probably the second biggest turning point in the company we had, which was realizing that the people that will pay for your product are not the ones, or necessarily the ones that are the most active in your product. So we're starting by tiering our company based on active users, and the most active users are the one that loved us the most. But then when we put a paywall and we asked people for their money, we found out that not all problems were equals.
That's quite interesting. Like, this journey is amazing. Like, this learning, one problem at a week. I really like that, because sometimes we just keep discussing and we don't prioritize. And I like what you mentioned. Solve it and don't bring it back. So in 3 months, you solve 12 problems. So as you mentioned, pretty much all the big questions. And then after that, you went to the seed or Series A investment, and then had to accelerate. So had a bit of more pressure there. Time is against you. And about monetization, yeah, we tend to assume things pretty fast, right? So we tend to assume, okay, let's go after the ones who are using the most and get the money. But you learn it's not like that. How was that for you? You say like not all problems are equal. Maybe you could share some more stories around this. I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, I think this is one of the. So this one depends highly on the kind of business you want to build, and maybe the industry you're in, whether it's mature or kind of just the things you want to prove, right? Like, I think if you want to build a modern web browser, you're probably not going to charge people, right? No one is charging for a web browser, and it's probably about growth and make sure you have like millions of users, right? But in our space, I think in analytics, I think what we learn is that, I mean, first, there is huge cost to run these companies. The kind of problems we had with data were Series C kind of, scalability issues. As soon as you get 1 or 2 users, they send you, 100, if not millions of tracking and data points. I think with our first 100 active users, we were already processing, I think, 3 million track events per hour. That was a lot. Yeah, imagine like 3 million lines in a database being written per hour, and you're just a startup of 2 people, and you shouldn't mess around with data because of security, privacy purposes, obviously, but also just for the purpose of the nature of the software you want to deliver. Because if you don't, have something accurate, no one is going to use your data visualization,
for sure.
right? So I think so I got a bit aside of your question here, but yeah, I think that was one. So we thought, okay, let's try to monetize fairly early on. We thought it was the ultimate validation. We thought like, okay, growing, having active users could be something, but eventually it's a crowded space. You mentioned it in the beginning. It's very easy to build another, toy in the space. Let's try to really nail down who has, the highest willingness to pay, or what are the biggest problems we can solve on which people are willing to put their wallet, right? And I think at the time what happened is we figure out that we had lots of B2C and B2B users, but when we talked to them about paying and the stuff we were doing for them, B2B customers had bigger problems and they were more willing to pay. At the time, I think it was a coincidence, but at the time we had built a feature that resonated a lot with B2B SaaS customers. We didn't know that, but that was one of the reasons why they liked the product so much and they were willing to pay for it. So one thing we did at June was we by default allowed people to do product analytics at a consumer level, but also at an account level. So you could tweak each chart with an account level view, meaning that instead of viewing how many users were doing something, you were viewing how many companies were using something. And then you could trace that down. You could click on a graph. It would open a side panel and you would see the names of the companies with their logos. And so that created a behavior where people were using June to start from a graph, click on it, see companies, click companies, and then see a bunch of information on those companies' behaviors. And that became a thread where after we had built this primitive, people wanted more of that primitive. So they were saying to us like, okay, now that I see a company profile, I would love to know if this company has, tickets open. I would love to, sync that information to my CRM because my sales or my CS is using it. And so we kind of pulled a thread of like B2B SaaS having very meaty problems that were not solved, which we learned along the way. Like we had no clue when we started this company that B2B SaaS were underserved. And since their stickiness was great, when we look at our charts, they were like the most sticky people. And whenever we would have, money conversation, they would be the one willing to spend the most because each of their customers were worth a lot more money. It became kind of a natural, path we wanted to take to serve these people. And so going back to your initial question on what were the problems that were the most important or worth solving, knowing that you have a user about to churn when each of your users is free or is paying $10 versus is paying like 10K to you per year, it's a whole different value, underlying value. And that's where and that's what I meant by no, all problems are worth the same for everyone.
Yeah, sometimes I do see some organizations saying, oh, we have a lot of people churning. And my first question generally is, who are they? Because you said, like, if you have the free, the $10 or the 10,000, these are different conversations, totally different ones. Now, what I'm thinking here, it has been like 5 years, the journey since you started. Probably you had a lot of learnings there, and mainly we learn the most when things go wrong. Do you have some stories of costly mistakes or failures on the way that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, we did so many mistakes. It took us so two learnings, maybe two big mistakes. It took us a while to identify this segmentation. So it took us a while to figure out that we would have to break down the market in verticals, in company sizes, in order to reach a strong product market fit. So it's something you hear a lot, right? Like just build for a specific audience and so on. But I think the mistake was always thinking that doing a basic segmentation was enough. So initially we're like, okay, let's focus on early stage startups, right? And then we're like, okay, let's focus on early stage startups that are product driven. So that product is the core of their business and they need to understand what's happening in the product. And then we're like startups, product driven, B2B SaaS. And then at the end, we were like B2B SaaS, vertical SaaS, because vertical SaaS had like organizational setup that made our product very relevant. So that was one mistake, not starting. We didn't niche down enough. We always assumed that a segment was a niche, while it wasn't for our product. Because it was a bit crowded, you said it, but also just because of how hard it is to just really nail down problems that people have, right? And I think that was super important. So that is what is one. A second one was on the pool of the market and how sometimes you should listen to your market versus you shouldn't. So I'll give you a very concrete example. When we started at the bottom of the market. So we started by targeting seed stage startup at YC, Batchmates. As we penetrated that market, we started to attract a lot of startups from a lot of different ecosystems all around the world. And the backlog of requests they had started to pile up. And so we're like, amazing, we're going to acquire all the startups on the planet. We're going to build all this stuff that they want. And once we're done with this, bottom market, we're going to graduate with them, right? Like, and then we're going to cross the chasm and all this kind of, theory. What we learn is that if you are not intentional about you moving up market, or you moving to a new vertical, or you moving to adjacent products, like verticals that you may use to complement your offer, you're going to be stuck forever in a market, because the list of requests that your existing customers can have on an existing set of product you have built, in analytics at least, is unlimited. And I would argue that in many industries is unlimited. And so unless you say like, no, this is the amount of work we're willing to put to own the startup segment, and it's fine if we don't own the full market of startups, but we're going to go intentionally to seed, Series A, Series B, and that's how we're going to slice the market. Because again, as you go up market, there is more competition, and you want to make sure you land in greenfield environments as much as you can. Unless you do that work, you're going to end up in some sort of like death loop where you stay in your existing market forever. More incumbents will come, of course, but also the market for startups is a very deadly market, because a lot of startups are just dying and don't have a high willingness to pay. So that was another mistake. I think eventually we figure things out. So then we had what we call Series A plan, which was, okay, how do we only sell to Series A company? And then we had Series A plus plan, which was a way to say, okay, we only sell to Series A, Series B plus kind of companies. And we would do that kind of like once a year. We would try to go one, stage above. But that took us 2 years plus to figure out that we had to be intentional on moving out markets.
That's an awesome story, and helps a lot those listening. And now it comes to the theory and reality. So you mentioned when you started that, you didn't know much about what it meant to be a founder and all of this. So you did your best. But one thing that happens nowadays, if you open any of the social medias, especially LinkedIn or X, you are going to get a lot of tips on what you should do to build the next billion-dollar startup, or what you should do to be an entrepreneur, and so on. And I do believe that many of these advices are outdated. I'm curious to hear from you what kind of advice people continue to follow, but they actually don't help them anymore. Do you have any example?
I mean, even the things that's the problem, when you have this kind of conversation, I'll go meta a little bit and then I will answer your question. I mean, this kind of like podcast or content we are going through right now, you want to be tactical, right? You want to give some very concrete piece of advice to people. And that's what you also asked me on the previous question, right? Like, what are the mistakes you have done? So I think we all are eager to get these nuggets and very concrete things, because they help us take shortcuts, and frankly, some of the time they're just really relevant. The problem is that sometimes they are not, as you said, because the world is changing, because what has worked in the past maybe is not going to work anymore, especially in go-to-market. Like there's such a short window for opportunities. When everyone starts to do the same thing, the window kind of shrunk. So that's why like product people love to give frameworks or like methodologies, or that's why I like to generalize as much as I can. It's because I think it gives mental models for people that hopefully remain relevant in the time, right? Across time. So I'm definitely guilty of giving some of this advice, and I try to resist it, but I know people love them, and that's why, you have to provide them. So I think, I mean, there's stuff that don't work. First of all, I think it's very visible on social media like LinkedIn, the trends. And I think trends, when they become too visible, tend to be the moment where people follow them. And that's usually too late. So I'll give you a very recent trend. Now people have really stepped up the production quality on videos. So now if you look at videos done by startups, they're recorded by cameras that cost, close to 10K, right? It's extremely premium, extremely high quality. It's almost like, film quality footage, right? And it's insane because now every time you see a fundraising announcement, you see one of those, right? They were great 3 years ago because it was really uncanny to see this, right? Like, why would a startup film their life as a movie, right? And it would really attract your eyes. You would be like, I want to watch that content. I want to understand why on heck, out of the 2 million they've raised, they invested 50K in the video. The truth is that now it's standard and everyone is doing it. And so, if you see all this high quality production video in your feed, you're a lot less likely to stop to watch one of these, right? So I do think that, social media are amplifying trends, and it's very important to resist to them because hopefully, like, eventually when they're too obvious, like, they're too late and they don't create the outcome you wanted them to create. So watch out on social media. Maybe look for outliers. You mentioned X. I think X is a lot more outlying than LinkedIn. LinkedIn is like mature, like late stage kind of communication. You probably take something that is on X a couple of days ago, you post it on LinkedIn, and most people haven't seen it. That's how many times I went viral on LinkedIn, is by sharing an opinion on something that everyone had seen before, right? So mind the timing, mind do stuff. I think they're super important. At the end of the day, building a startup is about two things. It's about building something that people want and being able to reach these people. And so I think this is something that was true 10 years ago that will remain true in 50 years from today. What is the one thing you're building, and are you building it the right way, the most efficient way, putting the right feedback, the right insight, the right differentiators? I think that's super important. And then how do you go to market? Like, where are the people that you want to reach, and how do you create those bridges between your product and them? Eventually people are going to sell you like there is 20 channels, 50 channels you can use, and you need to test them by order of priority and blah blah blah. Like, I think that's BS. I think what's important is think about where your customers are, think about what's the most efficient way to reach them so that they engage with your product in a way that makes sense, and never, I think, underestimate the message of the channel. There is this great quote from McLuhan. He was an economic teacher that said that the medium is the channel. I think this is super important. I think the medium you're using already communicates something about your product. So if you saw like an advertising of, I don't know, Airtable in the subway in New York, or CNN on television, or if you hear it at the beginning of a podcast, of your podcast or Lenny's podcast or something like that, it doesn't convey the same, even before you hear the messaging, it just doesn't convey the same feeling and the same, message. And so I always say to founders, I try to help, think about the value that the channel you're picking is going to convey, because it's ultimately something that people are going to feel. So that is a bit more abstract than to just, find out channels, but I do feel it's something important. When I found out products like Linear on Twitter, I was like, okay, Twitter is that early adopter sphere. It makes sense, like Linear is an early adopter product, at the time at least. And it felt like I was granted a superpower to use that product before the others found out about it. When I see a video of a startup that has raised money on LinkedIn, it's a whole different feeling now. It's like, okay, format that has been popularized for the last 3 years by companies like the browser company. I think they did a really good job here. And a social media which is very mature and very corporate. So this, they're telling me something and I'm gonna learn about them, but I'm not gonna emotionally connect with the product the way I would do on Twitter. And actually just clicking a website link on LinkedIn is a maze. You need to click on the people profile, scroll down, find the link. And if it's a company page, it's almost impossible. You need to go on the company page, go in the tab, click on the info tab, and then find the link. Like, this is literally, too far away.
I want to ask you one more question, which is about Amplitude. So you put all of this effort, 5 years and so on, and then Amplitude happened. So what happened?
To understand why we joined Amplitude, you have to understand the beginning of June. So when my co-founder and I, we started the company, we really wanted to make an impact. We're like, okay, what is the best way we can impact this, world, this tech world, tech bubble, let's call it. And we're like, okay, we think there are problems that are not solved, and we think by dedicating our time and energy to building a new product in this industry, we're going to be able to solve problems for people that haven't been solved, and across hundreds, thousands of people using our product from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and hopefully enjoying the experience with us, have changed a little bit their life for the better, and then many people life, right? That was really the initial point of June. Like, it's very naive, and it sounds like a bad Silicon Valley episode, but that was really the truth. And I think after 4 years and a half of June, sorry, we looked at our graph, at our chart. We're growing like in a very linear way. So business was profitable and growing in the right direction. But we started to ask ourselves, like, okay, how many companies are going to be using June next year, in 2 years, in 5 years? How much can we change that inflection point? And how much impact would we have if we join forces with someone who has realistically more impact than us? Because like more customers, more more visibility. And I think that's when like conversation kicked off with Amplitude. At first, it was very distant, like, hey guys, let's just meet and see. And I think eventually we realized that behind this company were great people with a great vision and a shared willingness to solve some of the problems we think are first world problems in tech. And so we're like, okay, let's see what we can do together. And so what happened next is that there's many ways you can, merge businesses. You can either acquire a business, you sell the technology and the customers. You can do acqui-hire, which is you just kind of hire the team, or you can do some merger and acquisition. Merger and acquisition being two different things. And those setups fit different kind of companies and motions. What happened when you have a large company like Amplitude and you have a kind of smaller company like June, with some overlap, is that it often doesn't make sense to integrate the technologies. Sometimes it makes more sense to rebuild some of the technologies at the acquiring company and then just acquire the talents. And this is what ended up happening for June. The team joined them, and then we created some integration. We advised a lot of our customers to move to Amplitude because we were moving there, and we supported them along the way. But it wasn't like, let's say, an official acquisition of the technology, at least. And we thought that was the best thing to do. And I just joined 3 weeks ago, so it's still super fresh. But from what I've seen so far, company is great and moving super fast. And I think there's lots of opportunities to build the right things for the customers, and customers are raving about the product. Like, I meet probably a customer every day now doing discovery calls and interviews. There's just a bunch of people out there that just love the product, and it's amazing to see it, and they can't wait for us to bring some of the DNA we had in our product to Amplitude.
I'm pretty sure you're going to share stories. It's just 3 weeks, so soon you're going to be sharing on X or LinkedIn what has been happening and so on. But I think it was a brave move and having clarity on where you wanted to go. That's nice. So getting to the end of podcast, any other thing you would like to share with those listening?
Yeah, I'm going to share my Amplitude journey. I actually think I did the first post today. Should go live.
Okay.
On vibe coding. I think this one is pretty cool. It's nice to see Amplitude and larger companies using vibe coding in their product development workflows. So shout out to one of our designers who's using vibe coding to streamline the discovery / user testing / development process. I think this is cool. No, just I guess since we did that move and joined Amplitude, I think a lot of founders have reached out to me, asking like, why did you do this? Why did you do so? Is it what you wanted? Things like that. I just want to say that we found out very late in the company journey that this kind of transactions motion exists. And we had never spoken to anyone in the space for the last couple of years. But in retrospect, I think it's very healthy to do it from time to time, right? So I would say like talking to corporate development teams is pretty not super healthy because their role is really, really to make the acquisition, go through or assess if you're like the right business to be acquired. But talking to product leaders at companies in your space, building relationship with founders at other companies in your space, and just start to build an understanding of how things shape outside of your little world. I think that's super healthy, and I would recommend a lot of people to do it. And there is a great book about M&A at startups called The Magic Box Paradigm. It explains end to end how you can do M&A work, but there is just the first chapter about just opening up and building those connections early on, because eventually they will just inform your strategy even if you don't decide that you should join forces. And I wish I had read it earlier. I would just say to people interested into this topic, they should check out the book or just summaries online. There's just a lot of summaries, because I did regret not to investigate that topic a bit earlier on.
How people should connect to you? Where do you prefer?
LinkedIn is usually the best place. I'm trying to be active there, and and DMs on LinkedIn are fairly open, so please reach out there.
I will share the links. Thanks for listening to this episode of Untrapping Product Teams. Subscribe to get more insights from us and keep tuned because we have a powerful lineup coming up. Let's keep untrapping the product road together.